On this episode of Plastic Surgery Uncensored with board-certified Beverly Hills plastic surgeon Roddy Raban, we're talking to our guest today, Andrew, about his rhinoplasty revision. Dr. Raban, what about his journey?
So first and foremost, Andrew, you there?
Yes, I'm here.
Okay. Thank you so much for jumping on this call and participating. As we've said in every episode, whenever we have a guest, we're so grateful that you, as a patient who has undergone a journey and perhaps in some extent was unhappy, you're willing to come on and share your journey, be vulnerable, and help somebody else out, because that's really the underbelly of our podcast. It's education and information. So thank you for coming. We'll start out right at the beginning. You had a rhinoplasty or a nose job. When was your first rhinoplasty that you had?
So the first one I had was a little over 2 years ago. So that would be June of 2017.
Okay, and tell me how, first of all, who was the surgeon? You don't need to name names because it's not relevant, but what was the process that you underwent to select the surgeon that you selected? Who was he? What kind of surgeon was he? How'd you find him?
So, I talked to some friends. I was living in Northern Virginia at the time, outside of Washington, D.C. I talked to some friends and, I did some research, and, several people recommended us, to go to a certain doctor, a certain practice. And they had great reviews. From what I heard from people, they spoke very highly. That's kind of how I went along with who I originally chose.
So that seems very reasonable, right? It sounds like you did, I would say, a reasonable amount of research. You spoke to friends, you read reviews.
I did.
And then, so in hindsight, because we're going to get into the fact that you were unhappy, ultimately leading to revision, is there anything that you
Were there red flags?
Is there anything that you missed? Like, okay, well, all happened, and now you look back, you're like, what, is there anything that you think you missed on your first go around in terms of doing homework, so to speak?
Absolutely. Plastic surgeons can do a whole variety of procedures, and I found someone that could do that. Now, what I did not do, though, was research if he was a specialist in rhinoplasty. And back then, I was not aware of how intricate such a procedure was. And you really, really do need an expert when you undergo any sort of procedure with the nose. And so that was my mistake. And, I accept full accountability for that. Now, I also wish he had been a little bit more honest with his inexperience in regards to rhinoplasty. So I think that goes both ways.
Did you ask him and you felt that he misled you, or did you not ask him? So that's a great thing. You wish you were more transparent about his inexperience. So where did you feel like that happened?
I honestly think it was mostly my fault. From what he saw with my nose and what he was recommending, it sounded like he knew what he was doing. And so, I don't think I questioned him enough in regards to his experience with that certain procedure.
Okay, fair enough. So one of the things that I think is so important is this concept of ownership. What you're doing, which is incredibly unusual, which is you're saying, wow, I had a bad outcome and I take ownership of it, which is, yes, the doctor did it to me, but I realize in hindsight that maybe there was a little more that I could have done. So you just admitting that,
absolutely,
you just admitting that is just empowering the next group of people, saying, listen, you can say that this person did this to me, but what we've echoed time and time and time again, the ultimate responsibility falls on you.
Absolutely. And once it's done, it's done.
So what was it?
Yeah.
So you had your nose done, and why don't you describe to me when did you start to notice that you were unhappy with your nose? When was that, and what did you notice?
So because the swelling takes so long with this procedure, I didn't really start noticing until I would say close to a year afterwards. The swelling subsided, and then that's when I could really see the intricate details. And so you invest a lot of time and money into a procedure like that, and then for you to realize it doesn't turn out the way you wanted, it's disappointing. So I would say it took about a year.
So it took about a year, and what were the things that you started to see? I'm going to comment on why it took a year, because you're absolutely right. It's very specific to noses. But go ahead and tell me what you noticed, what was happening. What did you start to notice?
Most of my insecurity around how it turned out was with the tip. It was scooped out, and I'm a male, so I felt like it was over feminized. And I have very, very thin skin, so you could see all the little tiny errors or inconsistencies with the nose. I mean, it's never going to be 100% perfect, but you want it to be as close to perfect as possible. And I was not happy with how it turned out.
So you hit on so many good points, and you could tell if you were into rhinoplasties as a patient or a doctor, you could tell that Andrew now knows what he's talking about, because the way he's communicating is absolutely correct. The first thing you need to know about noses, which is different than faces, breasts, tummy tucks, liposuction, eyelids, et cetera, is that you have no idea what your nose is going to look like until at least a year to 2 to 3. So
Wow.
because noses stay swollen for at least 18 months for 80%. So when you first get your nose done, and we'll take a celebrity, Bella Hadid, who everyone loves and she's a superstar and blah, blah, blah. If you start to notice her nose over the last 3 to 4 years, her nose is starting to look skeletonized, meaning you can start to see in her paparazzi photos, those that are not photoshopped, that like there's weird things starting to show up. And what Andrew's referring to is that when people have thinner skin, Monique, you have oily Latina, oily thick skin.
Yep.
Andrew has very thin white skin. The skin starts to shrink wrap over a year to 2, and it's very unforgiving, meaning any irregularity that your surgeon leaves behind, any imperfection in terms of the way he creates the nose, you don't have the luxury that, say, you do, and that your skin will just cover it. You actually start to see everything. And what he's referring to was exactly correct. So when we met, the things about his nose that were concerning and disappointing was that his nose looked skeletonized, which means that you could see everything. You could see the dots of his tip of his nose, and you could see that they were asymmetric, and you could see that between the middle of his nose, there was a little depression. So his nose looked skeletonized, and it also looked feminized. So he's a male, and it's very difficult to do male noses over women's noses because in a female nose, you have more room for error. What does that mean? If your nose is rotated or turned upwards a little too much, you're still a girl. If your nose is a little too scooped, you're still a girl. If your nostrils are a little too narrow, you're still a girl. But as a man, you don't have a lot of options. Your nose needs to be relatively straight, relatively projecting, and still strong and large. And so his nose was looking a little feminine because it was overly scooped, and his nostrils were starting to collapse a little bit. So spot on the money in terms of the description. And the thing that's really important as a take home is if you get your nose done and it looks fantastic the first 6 months, you are highly likely to become unsatisfied 2 to 3 to 5 to 7 years later because they're doing sort of classic non-structural rhinoplasty. So we met, right? And so tell me a little about our consult and what you saw different, and give us some education on the second phase.
So I set out a second consultation because 2 years had passed, and I was unhappy with the result. And you invest a lot of time and money into a procedure like that, so you obviously wanted to turn out well, and I was willing to invest more time and more money into finding a specialist that could help me achieve what I wanted in the first place. So we had a consultation, and it was incredibly thorough. Not only did you say you were going to fix everything, you also said that you were going to reinforce everything so that it was also going to be strong, which was really, really important to hear. So yeah, I was just very, very impressed with the way you discussed what you do.
What did you do the second time to identify this so-called expert? So teach other people who maybe, you have the luxury of 20/20 hindsight in front of you. So you were diligent. So what is it that you did differently this time? And how did you determine that, did you only come to me? Did you go to 5 people? How did you go about the process?
Well, I moved to Los Angeles about a year ago. And that seems like one of the best places to have a procedure like this done. And I did a lot of research. I read a lot of reviews. I looked at your background, where you were educated, where you did your residency, what your specialties were. I saw that you were part of the Rhinoplasty Society, which that was a great thing to see. And I did some research on that organization as well.
Right. So you're saying I'm looking for a rhinoplasty specialist. So first of all, you're absolutely right. certain procedures require specialization more than others. So you're not going to really identify a liposuction specialist because it's really something that we all do and should know how to do. Noses is a very, very specialized area where very few surgeons know how to do it or do it well. So you do need to. So you're looking for things that would say, okay, this guy or these surgeons are specialists in rhinoplasty. The Rhinoplasty Society, as you refer to, is a society that's designated only for surgeons that are selected to be in that society. So that helped you. I'm sure you didn't read reviews about tummy tucks. You read reviews about noses.
Yes.
And so on and so forth. Did you see multiple surgeons? What did you do the second time, or we were your first consult?
Honestly, you were my first consult, but I was so impressed with just the way you spoke and articulated what you do and what you were going to do for me if we decided to go forward. Because consultations, they're time consuming. It takes a while to see doctors. You also usually have to pay a fee for consultations. But I just really, really felt secure in what I was told. And I think I definitely 100% made the right decision.
Okay, so let's talk about what we did for you, because I think it's really important to understand, because this is really the crux of rhinoplasty. So if you're considering a rhinoplasty or you're considering a revisional rhinoplasty, this is where you got to pay attention. Most nose jobs are designed to make your nose smaller to some degree. So changing the shape of it is also part of that, making it smaller. So most people come in and say, "Hi, doctor, I don't like my nose because in general it's kind of big or large or doesn't fit my face. I want it to be more subtle or more pretty or handsome or whatever." So inevitably you're asking your surgeon to take your larger structure and make it smaller. So what do most surgeons do? They do what's called a traditional reductive rhinoplasty. What does that mean? It means we go in and we make your nose smaller by reducing your nose, whereby which we remove things. We remove what? Excess cartilage in your tip, making your tip smaller. Removing excess bone. Breaking the bone and bringing it together. Suturing or sewing your nose together. So what we're doing essentially is taking a large structure, making it smaller. So if you stop for a moment and you think about that from an engineering standpoint, what happens if tomorrow I go to the Golden Gate Bridge and I remove 15% of all the beams and cables? What will happen over time?
Water will get in the cars when they fall.
Right. It'll collapse.
Yeah.
Right. If I went into the building,
Destabilized.
It destabilizes, it collapses. If I went into the building that we're sitting in today and I took out 3 columns or 3 beams because now the building is 10% smaller, what would happen to this building with the next major earthquake? It would collapse. So then this idea that, oh my God, my nose is starting to collapse, what is going on, shouldn't by any means surprise you. So what do we do now? Now, with like advances in cardiac surgery, advances in brain surgery, advances in transplant, there are advances in rhinoplasty. It's been around for 50 plus years.
Wow.
So advances in rhinoplasty means, okay, so what we realized is when we did rhinoplasties in the past, 5, 10, 20 years later, noses would collapse. And so now what we do is we still make your nose smaller, but we do something called reconstructive rhinoplasty. And that's what Andrew was referring to, is we take cartilage, we'll tell you where it's from, and we put it back into your nose while we're doing your rhinoplasty to support the areas within your nose that we know in 5 to 10 years will start to weaken as a result of us making your nose smaller. So for example, remember the sides of your nostrils were a little pinched?
Yeah.
So I took cartilage and put it in there as support so that when you take a deep breath, your nose doesn't go inwards. Remember in the middle of your nose was a little narrow and looked a little pinched?
Yeah.
We added cartilage there to give it support. So where is this cartilage coming from? It's your own cartilage. And most patients, when they're going in for a primary, first time, no one's touched me rhinoplasty, we borrow their septum because we're already going to be fixing their breathing, because that's a part of your surgery. You shouldn't go and get a rhinoplasty to make it look pretty and leave your breathing alone, even if you think your breathing is fine. So when we do your breathing surgery, we're going to borrow that same cartilage that would otherwise go in the garbage. So when you come in, you do a septoplasty because I fix your breathing and your cosmesis. And that septum, which would otherwise go in the garbage, is now being recycled into your nose and used as structure. Now, if you're having a revisional surgery, meaning you had it done already and someone took your septum because it was done in the first surgery, then we need to get cartilage from somewhere else, which would be either a portion of your ear or your rib, which we've talked about in the past. What did we use for you?
I believe cartilage from my septum.
Correct, because you hadn't had your septum removed, right?
Right.
Right. So
Absolutely.
we use his septum, and we made his nose stronger than his nose was before we did the surgery.
I wanted to ask you a question, Andrew. Did you go
Yes.
back to the surgeon and tell him that you were unhappy?
I did not. No, I did not.
I'm just curious to know your thinking behind that, because I think a lot of, obviously you're not going to give him a second shot at it. That wasn't the point. But my question is,
Right.
what stopped you?
I have actually thought about this. I don't know if I should leave a review, because I want people to know that they really should seek out a specialist. I'm sure he does a fantastic job with the other procedures and services he offers, but in regards to what I had asked for and what he did, I would hope that other people wouldn't make the same mistake as me. So I have felt a little conflicted about how to approach that and what to do.
So you hit a very good topic. This is an area that's very dear to me. I believe it is your responsibility to pay it forward. And I'm a huge advocate, as you can tell by the very nature of why we have this podcast, is that if something happens to me, AKA I'm driving down the highway and all of a sudden there's a massive pothole and I go straight into it and blow a tire, I have two options. I can change my tire and keep on driving, knowing damn well that someone else is going to fall in that pothole, or I can put up a big sign that says, be careful, pothole, swerve left or right. And depending on who you are, you decide what to do. I really advocate patience, and it doesn't have to be nasty, but I believe you owe it to the next generation of people to go and leave an educational, informative review so that if you had read that review, you wouldn't have fallen in the pothole. Just think if the person right before you had a similar and most likely probably the same kind of outcome, would have said, you know what, yeah, this happened to me, but I don't want this to happen to someone else. And went and wrote a review, and in that research you did, you came across it, maybe you would have swerved out of the way. So I know that, and I don't mean this to say that you need to go and slam the guy, because if you need to temper it according
Right.
to how unhappy you are, but you definitely should say, hey, listen, this guy, I did my nose, I'm unhappy. These are the reasons why. And I would be cautious, and I would make sure that you do your homework. I don't think there's anything, that's your prerogative.
And even what you said was very thoughtful, which is, I'm sure he's great at the stuff he does more frequently. I mean, you don't go to a penis enlargement guy for a nose job.
Right.
Unless you're
Right.
Pinocchio.
And, he was a very nice man. His staff was wonderful. The facility was wonderful. And, I can leave feedback without being vindictive and petty, even though surgery is a very personal experience. But yes, you can leave positive feedback in the hopes that other people don't make the same mistake or do more research before they make such a big decision.
Yeah, I think that's a beautiful concept. And I think overall it's the right way to approach. I mean, why do we have reviews? Why do we have platforms? Why do we have chat groups? We do that because we live in a world where exchange of information, whether you like it or not, is happening. The last component I wanted to mention about your nose that was unique was that you had the thin skin. So we talked about the cartilage collapsing and being weak. We replaced that with your septum. But you have a unique element, it's called transparency, which is your skin was very thin. So anything we did was going to show. So what did we do about that? Do you remember?
Yes, we used a layer of fascia from the side of my head to
Right.
kind of put over the nose as a layer so it would look less skeletal.
Yes, so that's exactly it. That's a super complex, and as attesting to your thing that you want to go to individuals who specialize, what we did is we borrowed a little piece of fascia. Fascia is the skin over a muscle, which we took from the temporalis, which is on the side of your head, in your scalp. You'll never know it's there, whatever. And we use it as a tarp to place over the structures that were there so that as time goes on and your swelling settles, you have a little bit more camouflage than the skin that you already have.
It's like putting a blanket under a thin sheet.
Correct.
All right.
It's
so
a blanket.
You got his temple blankie and put it under his nose sheet.
Yeah.
Okay. So I just like people to be able to picture things, Dr. Raban.
Yes.
Thank you so much for listening to this episode of Plastic Surgery Uncensored. This one was Rhinoplasty Revision. And Andrew, we couldn't have asked for a better guest. We so appreciate that you took the time and that you're a positive person. I love what you said about leaving the review with the doctor. I love that you said that you could be informative without being vindictive. That was great.
Thank you, Andrew.
Absolutely. Thank you so much.
Appreciate having you.
And we appreciate you
I
guys.
appreciate you, Doctor.
Yay, staying tuned to Plastic Surgery Uncensored.